This is going to be the most epic chess recap video you have ever seen. It is the third day of the Skilling Open as part of the Champions Tour, and 13 players are trying to make it into 8 spots for the quarterfinal and the higher prize fund. We're going to kick things off with the matchup between Magnus Carlsen and Hikaru Nakamura, and I am going to continue to update you as the results come in. One thing is the tiebreak system. Let me just quickly explain that. Obviously, it's the amount of points that you score, but what if a lot of people compete for the same spot? Then it's your head-to-head encounter, how many points you scored against those guys, and if all of that is the same, it's the amount of wins you have overall. All right, let's go. So we have e4 from Magnus, e5, and of course you can use the video timestamp to jump around. Bishop c4, a bishop's opening from Magnus here to kick things off. Knight f6, d3, and c6. This is the difference that black can play if you don't develop the knight to f3. You've never forced your opponent to play knight to c6. Bishop's opening is a very tricky opening, by the way, for those of you who want a new weapon and don't want to play the Vienna for some reason. And this is the point, that after knight f3, d5, white plays bishop to b3, and taking here is a little bit too dangerous because knight e5 would go for this. So bishop to b4 check, Hikaru trades, and then plays queen c7, kind of an interesting way, not a very theoretical way here to guard the pawn. Castles, a trade on e4, well, I should say not a trade, because here Magnus doesn't recapture. And this is, again, it's not checkers. I say this a lot, you don't always have to take. Knight g5. Hits this and this, and this with the bishop. Hikaru obviously castles, and now Magnus, rather than taking with his pawn, takes back with the knight, and has a little rush going over here. The bishop is very strong. Maybe he'll play f4, maybe he'll bring in the queen. Hikaru plays knight d5. So Hikaru's falling behind a little bit in development. In fact, Magnus can already go here and create a checkmate threat. But Hikaru would just play h6. And it forces Magnus to retreat, and even though he's attacking a pawn, it's not actually so clear what's going on. So instead, Magnus breaks in the center. He has a lead in development, so he wants to get the jump on Hikaru. Hikaru does not take. Now he plays h6, creating a threat on the knight. The knight comes back, and Hikaru finds a very nice, high-level idea here to relieve the pressure from the center. He plays the move bishop g4, and that looks like it just gives away a pawn, but he realizes that he has a moment here to play knight d7. He can play knight d7, now the pawn on e5 is not going anywhere, and if Magnus tries to gobble everything with d5, this is no good. e5 is hanging, and after something like this, he's doing quite well. Knight e5 comes, it's threatening this is under fire, the rooks are going to come to the middle. Not a good position here for Magnus. Instead of playing the move bishop d5, he just plays h3, and he gets this position. Then, right here, Hikaru played knight f6, offering a trade to Magnus, and Magnus blundered. He played rook d1, and it's not so clear why this looks like a blunder. I mean, how does this look like a blunder? Actually, this looks very good for Hikaru. He's got all this pressure. Well, Hikaru plays the beautiful knight g5, hanging his queen, but counter hitting here and guarding f7. Magnus plays the move queen e3, and it looks quite nice. It looks quite nice because if queen takes, you take. This is still under fire. But what he forgot, Magnus, he forgot that Hikaru can just go to that square anyway. Look at this. Knight f3 check. If you take with the queen, you lose your rook. So if you take with the pawn, Hikaru goes check. The queen is hit from 2 different directions. So you take, and now rather than taking back, I in between. I do the Zwischenzug, rook e1, and then I win this. Now the game is far from over here because Magnus is still feasting on the queenside pawns, but black is up in exchange. Hikaru's got to play this extremely precisely. So first he gets a5, a4, g6, and king g7. He does this so that he can potentially mobilize out of here. But you see the problem? He just has too many weaknesses. He did have a way here where instead of rook e5, he could have played rook b1 to maintain pressure. But in the game, what ended up happening is Magnus just very quickly piled on the pressure, won the f7 pawn, and they repeated moves. Engine showed that rather than playing rook to e5, Hikaru could have played, again, as I said, something like this, hoping for rook c6, rook b2, and this is definitely winning for black. You maintain your pawn, you don't lose this, but it's going to take a long time. The really bad thing for white here is the 4 pawn islands. Obviously, isolated pawns with no pawn neighbors. You have 4 pawn islands here, so way too weak. But the way it happened in the game is that even though you lost b2, you also lost it at the cost of f7, and they repeated shortly after. But always cool when the titans clash. And this is how we started our day with a glorious tactic. And we'll move on now to the game between Giri. Actually, I'm going to show you this one first. Firouzja versus Ding Liren. This was, Firouzja started the day like in 3rd or 4th position. And he's hoping to maintain it and qualify. This was also kind of a 2 knights, not a bishop opening, but a 2 knights. This one didn't get too spicy until the middle game. Not too much to focus on here. The players just shuffling, breaking in the center. And really the most exciting part came right around now. Ding Liren plays knight b4, looking to get Firouzja's bishop. Firouzja gives it to him. And there's a pin on the knight on c3 to e1. Bishop d2 stops that. Now rook b8 defends. And Firouzja says, look, man, I've had enough. I've had enough. e5. Let's make something happen in the center of the board. Take, take. Ding throws in this. Queen c3. Interesting idea. Now, why would he do that? Because that's called an outpost. It's a square from which you cannot be booted. Normally, there's a knight or a bishop, but a queen also can have an outpost, pressuring every single direction. So Ding plays bishop e6, rook c1, and now rook d1. And we're pressuring down the side of the board. Knight d4 now. Beautiful. Trying to get into c6. So Ding plays it himself, kind of sacrificing the pawn. He can take it, Firouzja, but there's going to be a very nasty pin if he takes it. So he plays king h2, just a waiting move. And then bishop e1, looking to potentially reroute to the other side, and also opening up his rook. Bishop e1 does open up his rook. Players shuffled a little bit around here. Knight came back to f3, queen e3, knight d5, and bishop d5 is right when the game kind of got the most exciting. It looks like Firouzja's rook is just going to get locked in. The problem is that after queen g4, it's not clear who's attacking who, and so Firouzja sacrifices a pawn with check, and then plays bishop c3. So by taking this pawn, Ding Liren got a pawn with a check, and yet it's actually not even so clear what's going on, because the bishop is about to mow you down. Queen g6, and now a very, very nice idea from Firo. He plays knight f5. And after this trade, rook d7, he has to give up this pawn. Here, Ding had to really play f6, but that's just a kind of a weakening move. I'm not sure why he didn't play it. Maybe he was very worried about knight to d6, but apparently if you just give away the rook and preserve kind of this diagonal, your position is not so bad, because white's rook is not getting out. That's a tough thing to evaluate, and Ding instead plays knight d7, and now, well, Firo hits him with a nice little tactic to get out. You can't take the pawn because knight f6 is a fork. Knight f6. And, well, this is glorious. What's about to happen? Rook h6. And Ding plays rook e8 with the threat of going down to e2. White to move, checkmate in 2. I'm going to take a sip of my wine. Grape juice, in case kids are watching. Yeah, it's called a mating net. Bishop f6. Ouch. Cutting out the king's escape, and there's just nothing you can do. Rook to h8. Just a friendly reminder. Firouzja the beast, in case you forgot. And we're going to move to the third game that I wanted to show you, which is between Anish Giri and the same culprit, ALIREZA Firouzja. Giri was first place going into last day. He was first place at the end of day 1 and 2, and he's looking also to qualify. At the time of this game, I believe he had like 4 wins. Maybe 3 or 4 wins, but he's having an excellent tournament. And Firouzja challenges him in an open Sicilian. Giri, to me, is probably second most prepared player on earth. Maybe Fabiano is number 1, but their openings are just insanely strong. This is the classical. It's called the Richter-Rauser variation with bishop g5, queen d2, castle long, and this kind of passive bishop setup repelling any enemy forces. It's a really strange Sicilian, kind of passive, but a lot of tactical opportunities. So knight d4 and queen c7. And Anish here decided to go for g4. Logical. And here Firo plays a ridiculous looking move, h5. To the uninitiated, this just looks totally bonkers. To allow your king to be stuck in the center. But in many of these Richter-Rauser positions, that's exactly what happens. That your king just stays here forever. You don't actually castle. So Firo is attacking on the queen side, very natural in the Sicilian. You use kind of this c-file, you rook c8 and kind of do your thing over here. And, well, Giri says, I mean, you're stuck in the center, so f4, f5. Take, and e5. Knight e4, very logical move from Giri, take. Secures the control over the d5 square, and we get rook to c4. I mean, it's very strange that in the middle of a board, you get a move that just attacks the bishop, like this. Giri plays the best move. Queen g2 is a beautiful move. Many of us would see the bishop as hanging, so we would move it. That is incorrect. He moves the queen to defend and also threaten rook to come down here. So ALIREZA starts running. That's what the king's got to do sometimes. Can't get any help, you ain't got backup, you just start running. Bishop to d3, rook comes and pins. Rook c1. This, to me, was a disaster waiting to happen. Anish played rook c1 to avoid any tactics pinned here and potentially to break out with this. But this is such a passive move. And it gave ALIREZA a second breath of air. He starts getting out. He starts getting out, he starts fighting back. Anish it would have been a lot better for Anish to go in with rook g8, something like this. And when the king goes to a square like c7, you can just take. You are fine. This is completely okay. The problem is, it's only completely okay if you find the move rook to c1 now. You say, Levy, what the hell? Well, take. Who's gonna guard the king? So on the one hand, it's completely okay. On the other hand, he would have had to get to this position in his head and go, oh wow, I have rook c1. Because here's the thing with bishop to e2. Black just gets too much activity. And maybe Anish saw this, right? Maybe he saw this from a distance and he said, this doesn't look very good. Actually, the only move here that doesn't lose for white is to play queen h5, which is so hard to see 6 or 7 moves in advance in a rapid game. And it's just tricky. I mean, it's just tricky with e4 arriving. If you don't see that, maybe you slide the rook out of the way to a square like f1. You don't just go all in just yet. But Firouzja's creating very good practical chances for himself. And here, he played the move of the game as far as I'm concerned. Although Engine didn't like it, I still think this gave him very good practical chances. d5. And now what this does is it brings in the queen. The queen can now come to d6. And here, well, like I said, the computer doesn't like it because you know what the move here that wins for white? h4. That's the move. White is just supposed to say, to hell with everything. Yeah, h4, h5, h6, h7. Just push. Push the pawn. Well, I mean, that's not very human, and now Anish is locked, and Firouzja has all of his defenses. So Anish plays c4. Firo allows himself to get taken, a pawn taken with check, but because he realizes that 2 pawns here, even that one being lost, Giri has nothing. And all of a sudden, the rook endgame is just lost because 2 pawns are just gonna come, and that's exactly what happens. I mean, you know, we see slowly the pawns are coming. That's what I'm saying. Pawns are coming, pawns are coming, pawns are coming. And here, one very nice idea at the very end. Don't move your rook, don't take e2. Beautiful move from Firouzja. If you take the rook, I just promote. And a shorter while later, as he lost the rest of his pawns and brought his king down. Beautiful, beautiful coordination. Pass pawns, 2 rooks, king comes all the way down the board. Glorious game from Firo, and he defeats Anish Giri. This was Anish Giri's first loss of the entire thing, okay? So now we're moving to the final few rounds of the day. Final, like round 14, round 15, okay? So before we jump into the next games, I want you guys to keep something in mind. There are still like 7 people competing for 3 spots. Magnus has kind of secured something at the top for himself as he's drawing. Wesley So's doing quite well, drawing games here and there and picking up points. But we have MVL, we have Nepo, we have Rajabov, we have Firouzja, we have Anish, all around the same score group. We have Hikaru, who is like 7th or 8th at this moment. So we're going to look at the game now that Hikaru played against David Anton Guijarro, the Spanish Grandmaster. So we have a Nimso to start things off. And now we get e3, c5, bishop d2, c5. And a trade quickly. And Hikaru goes for a setup which involves a trade and a really fascinating pawn structure. It's a really imbalanced position. If you need to win a game of chess, you've got to play like this. You have to create some sort of imbalance. Now, the dangerous thing about David is that he had 5 wins up to this point. Hikaru had just 2. So you can't tie with the guy, because ultimately you're going to lose the tiebreak of the wins. So you have to play for the win. Hikaru says, all right, let's create a little bit of a queenside kind of structure here. Let's play with the knight and the queen. And now let's bring the knight to the center of the board. Bishop back to e2. And Hikaru plays a very cool idea, g5. This is so daring because it's begging for white to just open things up with the open king. But he wasn't doing that. Anton, and he was rerouting his knight, and then Hikaru played bishop c8. What bishop c8 does is it cuts the entire diagonal from the knight. We get g3, bishop h3, and rook c8. The trade offered here, and he backs up to d7 and chooses not to do it. Bishop to g2, and now black plays the move c4. So we have advancement on this side. Rook c1, knight goes back to the center, queen d4, and another nice idea, queen g7. Using that free space. Why did he go back with the queen here? So the knight can move. The knight couldn't move. Now the queen is guarded. Bishop f1, f5! Another pawn in front of the king going, defended by the bishop and the rook. A big trade, and bishop e2. Black is slightly better here because of the extra space. Now Hikaru offers a trade of queens, Anton refuses. Knight f6, and he's won the pawn. So now black is a pawn up, but white begins to create counterplay with f4, and bishop f1. Brilliant idea here from David Anton, rerouting the bishop to the diagonal. Now we get f5, no queen trade. Hikaru gets his rook trade, but at what cost? The pawn is no longer on the d file, so it's isolated. And now this nice idea, queen d1! Taking full control of this file, and he's getting in. Queen e3 from Hikaru, queen d6, rook f8, defending everything. And Hikaru picks up the f5 pawn, but loses the e pawn. Now here Hikaru had a cool idea, queen f2. And if king takes, he could have played knight e4. Double check of the king. If queen f1, king f1, it looks like this works. Oh, discovered attack, I'm winning the queen. Queen f8, lights out, and you lose this. So Hikaru goes back to d7, and his king is just barely safe. A queen trade here, and knight c5, and Hikaru's going for knight a4. Now David here could have played rook f4, traded the rooks, but he was worried about knight a4. And it looks very scary. It actually doesn't look okay at all. But his king gets there in time. Instead, he went for a sacrifice of his bishop, saying rook in 4 versus knight in 2 is going to be a draw. Now watch what happens. Knight e6 and rook b8. Hikaru gives away the a6 pawn for rook takes b2. It is so important in these kinds of endgames to have a passive king. If you're trying to win with rook and knight, I'm saying if you're trying to beat the other guy should have a passive king. You should have an active king if you're trying to win. Remember, rook and knight versus rook is a draw, so you need that one last pawn. And that's what Hikaru does here. He cuts off David's king, and watch the technique. Knight comes to d4, it's coming to f3. So David goes knight h4, now the knight pivots and goes to f5, going for this pawn. And in using the h-pawn, Hikaru takes and maintains vision of the pawn, and that's it. I mean, you just king h4. And the game is over. It's very important not to go to g4, because then rook g8. So this is the only way that black can get out, is by checking. White can get out is by checking and then promoting. If you don't allow the check, there's no rook move that works. Rook h8, rook a7, and this is guarded. So in the game, we got king h4, rook b8. He won the pawn, and a few moves later, David resigned. Perfect game. If you need to win a game, this is the kind of game of chess that you need to play. This is the kind of game of chess that you have to play, my friends. Now we move to another game going on in this round as the players are jostling. We have Aronian versus Giri. We have a Sicilian and something that shocked the hell out of me when I saw it. Bishop c4. It seems like people are trying to get Anish out of preparation as desperately as possible because he's fearsome. So Anish plays principal chess, d6, e6, bishop e7, castles, and now it's kind of like an e45. It kind of looks like a Rui, like an Italian maybe. I mean, notice how many tempi LEVON spends on like moving his bishop around. Then he breaks in the center with d4, take, knight b6, queen e2, getting the queen out. Rook is coming. We get rook c8, bishop h2, h6, rook d1, and this was bold by Anish because it makes a decision. It makes Aronian make a decision. e5. Knight comes to the center, and the bishop comes back. Real question is, what the hell's going to happen with this bishop? So we get knight a4, rook b1. It looks like Anish is making progress. This actually looks very unpleasant. But then the knight goes back. So then this knight goes back. A lot of rerouting in this game. Anish comes in the other way. We're going over there. That's what we're trying to do. a5, bishop c2, knight d2. Super strange move. Very fancy move. Whatever takes, you take the bishop. Because now the queen no longer guards. LEVON says, so what? Rook c1. Knight f3, queen f3. The problem is that Anish just spent all of these moves, like d7, b6, a4, b6, c4, blah, 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 and now he doesn't even have a knight anymore. So rook c4, knight e2, defending the center, b4 and queen g4, and it's like, who's gonna guard the king? Bishop g5, f3, f5, en passant. En passant, this f5, there's en passant. Apparently it was better for Anish to take here, and then bring, well, I guess you can't bring the queen. Queen f4, you cannot play queen g5, so you would have to move the knight out of the way. But this is why engines are so savage. They see stuff like knight c5. You can escape through a threat because of this. In the game, Anish got hostile, but after en passant, knight f6, the queen's under attack. There's bishop takes g5. Very nice idea. You cannot take the queen because I take you, and both of us have hanging pieces. Knight e3, I think there's like just bishop d3, for example. Oh, and the worst part, rook c1. It's not rook c1, it's knight c1. So you can never take my bishop because your knight is hanging. Oh, so many tactics. So many tactics. And Levon just cleans it up. Levon cleans it up, rook c7, and Anish Giri on move 34 resigns the game. 2 losses in a row for Anish, and at this point, he tumbles from 1st to 8th. 8th place. Anish at this point hanging on, and, well, also tweeting out some really funny stuff. At this point, Anish tweeted out something like, stop the count. You know, they should have stopped the count after the 2nd day, and then he would have been winning on the 2nd day. But instead they didn't, and they kept on playing. So, it's time for the second to last round. It's round 14 and 15. A lot of guys still very close together. And it's time for Hikaru versus Firouzja. So, a Caro-Kann. And a classical variation. All of this is theory. Knight c3, take. Something like this. Bishop d3, take, e6. Bishop f4, it's classical main line. This is still actually all theory, believe it or not. Queen b6 is the first new idea. Now we get bishop c3. And Hikaru attacks in the center and slides the queen back to get out of the way of the rook. Then we get bishop b4. Castles. Take, castles. And an attack down the b file by Hikaru with rook coming this way. And f4. So Hikaru doesn't need to win this game, but he's trying to. And Firouzja's no slouch. He's going to fight back. But here he finds this really nice idea. Sorry. Knight fd7. Getting out of the way of white's attack. So the knight is never going to get hit there. And hitting him in the center with the move knight fd7 and e5. The knight on e5 is what's under pressure. So here Hikaru kind of sacrifices a pawn. Not quite. You can't quite take this. But now he sacrifices a pawn with knight c5. Giving up a pawn with a check. With a check. But this knight is so good. And black cannot take on c4. Black can't even trade and take either of these pawns. Because if you take here, I'm going to go rook d7. Not d6. My arrows are off today. And you can't take on c4. Oh my goodness. Because queen c3 would pin the knight to the queen. And it's just over. Rook c1 and it's over. So Firo is thinking. He's like, I don't know what to do. I'm under pressure. I'm up a pawn, but my position's not so pleasant. Let me play rook d8. It's obviously the natural move. I should sacrifice. Not sacrifice. I should trade. If rook d8, you know, if something like this, you can't take because queen comes to h4. So he plays rook d8. And here, ladies and gentlemen, Hikaru uncorked a gorgeous move. Queen takes b7. Sometimes it's the move that looks least likely that kills you. After queen b7, you have to take. You have nothing else. We take, and it's either checkmate or the queen has to sacrifice itself. And here, knight f8 wins a pawn. But this is one of the most instructive endgames I've ever seen. Knight in 5 versus knight in 5. You dominate the enemy pieces. You play the move c5. You would think you play this move to promote, but that's not the case. The knight can't move. So you play king g3, king f3, king e3, king d4, and you're winning. Black cannot trade knights with you, because if they do that, the pawn is a decoy, and the king will get in and take everybody. And after a6, king e5, that's it. Literally, Hikaru's king Played the last, like, 10 moves of the game, and here we got resignation. Just resignation. Firouzja just resigned. He couldn't move his knight for the remaining 10 moves. Queen b7, rook d8, and an amazing grandmaster technique to convert this. I was speechless. I remember when queen b7 happened, I was like, and then just c5 and not even pushing the pawn. So instructive. So instructive. Dominating the enemy piece activity, and then mobilizing the king in the endgame. That's such a lesson here. Now, this is the most important final round game. I feel like we featured Firouzja 4 times today. He was at the heart of everything, okay? He was at the heart of everything. In the final round, there were a lot of draws. There was just in general a lot of draws over the course of the day as people tried to secure their positioning. Going into the final round, Liam could qualify. Firouzja could qualify. MVL could qualify. Rajabov could qualify. Giri could qualify. They're all fighting for it. Every single one of them fighting for it. Hikaru and Magnus already kind of secured their spots. Nepo, Aranyan also kind of secured their spots. So let's see what happens in this game. This was a very long game. The opening was kind of a reverse. London, ready. Honestly, not the most important thing in the world. I'm going to scroll through it just for you to kind of enjoy. But it was a lot of maneuvering, a lot of positioning. No pieces were getting traded, just pawns. And then then Firo went for the queen trade because Firo needs to draw this game. So he's very happy just trading the queens and letting Liam have at it. Okay. And then Liam starts going for it because Liam has to win. Liam has to play this game for a win if he has any chance of qualifying. Because going into this game, he's a point out for qualifying, and Firo can draw to kind of secure his position. So we get knight d4, g4, bishop f1, king comes forward. It's crazy that a game with no queens could be so kind of dynamic and interesting. Firo, again, very happy to accept a position where he's not really doing too much. You know, just putting his pieces on diagonals, you know, getting the pieces off the board. But I don't think at any moment did he really just realize that he's very passive and he's going to have to defend here. And he's, again, you see how trade happy he is. Liam plays one move, bishop to c7, and things start going, like, astray. Firo takes, of course, and plays rook d2 and says, dude, it's rook bishop for pawn, rook bishop for pawn. How am I ever going to lose this game? And Liam says, well, let me show you. Look at what Liam does. Liam shuffles around, puts his pawns on squares opposite the color of the bishop. I mean, this is never going to get this. And activates his king, while Firouzja's rook is stuck patrolling the second rank. Then we get rook c6, rook f6, and the rook parks itself on e3. Very instructive, maintaining non-stop pressure on everything. Then, the bishop trade. This is so important. Trading the bishop at the right moment to win the g3 pawn and advance here. So Firo doesn't want to trade. Now that you know he doesn't want to trade, it's time to get active with the rook again. And it's time to start picking apart the weaknesses. And in doing so, pushing our pawns here on the queen side. Now it's time to add a new player into the mix, the f-pawn. We're not trading unless it's advantageous to us. f5. Okay, rook is shuffling around. f4. Now the king has arrived. Firouzja's playing the whole endgame down a rook. He's just not moving his rook. He's not moving his rook until now. When was the last time Firouzja even moved a rook? Like 25 moves ago? Literally 26 moves ago, Firouzja played the move rook d2, and it never moved again until the 63rd move of the game, and more clamps. Don't trade unless it's advantageous. Let's win a pawn. Let's use the a-pawn. Let's use the a-pawn. Rook a4, that's it. Rook trade. And Liam wins. Liam wins the game. I mean, we're shuffling a little bit. Here, again, this is a losing king and pawn endgame. So we go all the way down here, and Firouzja resigns. Okay, so Liam now has 8, Firouzja has 8, MVL has 8, Rajabov has 8, and Giri has 8. 5 people need to get stuffed into 3 spots. 2 people cannot make it. Ladies and gentlemen, the moment that you have all been waiting for. This is who has made it to the final 8. ALIREZA Firouzja is not in this list, despite having the most wins of any player in the event. He won 6 games out of 15. Not a single player won 6, and a few of them won 5. Magnus won 5, Arunyan and Rajabov won 5, others won 4. Giri the man, with 3 wins, makes it in by virtue of the head-to-head tiebreak system. How many points he scored against some of the other players, and his 4th tiebreak, actually. You look at the 4th column, it's a mathematical sequence of you put certain, I don't even know exactly, it's called Sonnenberger, you guys, anyway. Crazy. Liem winning the last round, still couldn't make it, and eliminated Firouzja with him. If they had drawn, Firouzja would have made it, and MVL would have been in. But this is it. The playoffs begin tomorrow. We have Magnus versus Giri. We have Hikaru versus MVL. We have Rajabov versus Wesley. And we have Jan versus Arunyan. The match of guys whose name starts with Jan and ends with Jan. Alright, my friends. This was, hope you made it this far. Looking forward to making the recap video for you tomorrow. Who do you think is going to win the whole thing? Leave a comment.